Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host Ren, and today we conclude the first part of the Belmont Saga. The first book, Sands of the Solar Empire. We will complete that book, and then we will move on to the second book, Against the Druries. Last week, as Paymaster Stenstrom delved into the darkened and apparently haunted recesses of the Seeker, he encounters a whole passel of soul devourers, all starving for his soul. He's being attacked by one soul devourer after the next, and he's gunning them down with his ints until one of the cinnabar strikers cracks, and he gets tackled, and he feels his soul being slowly ripped out of his body, and all of a sudden the soul devourer is pulled away in a hail of, it sounded like sand or grit or something. And then he hears a voice calling out to him, and who emerges from the dark? It's Lily. Lillian of Gamboa, his girlfriend, his on again, off again girlfriend. There she is on his ship, thousands of stellar miles from Kana. How did this happen? Well, she explains that none of the things he thought he knew about her are correct, and that she has known him a lot longer than he thought. That their initial meeting at his mother's request in the chalk house, that she had known him long before that, and that she's been watching him for most of his life, and that she's not from Gamboa, and that she's not just an intelligent and talented but otherwise mundane girl from Gamboa. She's actually quite arcane, and she's not even from Gamboa. Everything he thought he knew about her is wrong. And then she convinces him after a while that it is in fact Lily, not a deception, not a soul devourer in disguise or some other trick. It's Lily just revealing herself, and she was about to tell him her true nature and who is behind her, who are her sponsors, who's pulling her strings. But then she gets summoned back and doesn't have time to tell him. He's returned to the Seeker, and delving deep into the Sisters' Priory, he finds dozens of soul devourers all dead, apparently killed by Lily. Eventually, under the great dome of the Priory, he finds a sleeping Taara and A-Ram, and he rescues them and returns them to the bridge. And we've got nothing but questions at this point. Like, what the hell? What are you, Lily? How are you doing these things? How do you have access to a legendary NOAB device known as the Paramel, the Great Lantern, a lantern that once orbited Kana as a moon, known as the Gala's Eye? Lantern that's of the arcane. It was created by the elders. And how does Lily have access to it? Well, we don't know. So we move on to the final chapter of Sands of the Solar Empire, Chapter 4, Druries' Belt. And this will conclude the first book, Sands of the Solar Empire. Then we will move on to the first chapter of the next book, Against the Druries. And I'll have a little commentary on that before we begin the reading. But let's get to the conclusion of Sands of the Solar Empire. Stenstrom laid them out on the floor of the bridge. Taara, wake up! She stirred. Hey, Bill, how about a few more minutes, huh? I was having a nice dream, okay? Taara, you've been asleep for 20 hours. We all have. We're missing our burn. That news opened her eyes. She sat up. What? 20 hours? Belle, we can't miss that burn, or we'll be headed out into the wildlands. She wobbled to her feet and grabbed her boots. They turned to A-Ram and shook him awake. Eventually he stirred and awoke, holding his head. Oh, gods, I feel like I've slept for days, he said. You have. I seem to recall dreaming of monsters. Quite appropriate, Stenstrom thought. A-Ram made his way to the helm and was shocked. For the love of creation, we've slept through our burn. Taara pulled on her boots and ran into his office. She checked her sextant, pointing it towards the window. The great yellowish rope of Druries' belt stretched off into the distance like a golden lasso. She cursed as she worked. Taara, what's our bearing? A-Ram asked. She stared out the window, gazing through the sextant. Taara, give me a moment, will you? Gods, we are well off course. Stenstrom watched her work. What's that going to do to us, Taara? Can we get back on course? We're way out of the shipping lanes, that's for sure. She ran back into the bridge and flopped into the missive's chair. She brought up a screen and punched in a series of numbers. Feeling drained, Stenstrom plunged into his chair and closed his eyes. His laden thoughts spun. Captain Gwendolyn coming in her scouting ship to board and possibly kill him. Lily killed over 100 soul devourers. He, with just his 2 pistols, would probably have been overwhelmed by such a number. A-Ram, turn hard to port, 3 turns, Z-15 degrees, Taara said. He heard the helm groan as A-Ram turned the pegs. They did it, Lily said. And who are they? Taara again, her little voice confident and full of authority. I'm burning the Westminster for 5 minutes. And 3, 2, 1. The ship shuddered. I accept, Lily said in his mind. I accept. Bell, wake up. He opened his eyes, and Taara and A-Ram stood over him. Oh, did I sleep? You sure did. Just a few minutes. He stood up, seeing the now familiar environs of the bridge laid out with the clunky machinery of their threadbare existence on the ship. The stolen generators, the dangling wires, the hiss of the Macon, and the bundle of Instameals. Are we, back on course? Yep, Taara said. All fixed. A-Ram, how's the helm? It's locked and marked. We shouldn't need another burn again until we get to Naris about 4 days hence. Stenstrom thought about it. Taara and A-Ram could have been killed. Look at all this, the dead ship, the jury-rigged parts, the vast gulf between here and their destination. A ship full of demons, and a possible confrontation looming with Captain Gwendolyn. Had he the right to endanger Taara and A-Ram any further? I'm thinking... Thinking what, Belle? Taara asked. I think we should turn around and head back to Kana, and I should give myself up. I can't endanger you two any further. Creation knows if this scuttled tub is up to making the journey to Baz. It'll probably break down right in the middle of nowhere. And then there's Captain Gwendolyn and her scouting ship. You two don't need that sort of trouble. What's brought this on, Belle? A-Ram asked. Did something happen while we were asleep? Stenstrom considered his answer. You and Taara were abducted and taken into the rear section of the ship, Deck 7, deep in the Sisters' Priory. Who abducted us? Demons. And no, they weren't after Taara's soul, they were after mine. They abducted you to get to me. A-Ram turned a slight shade of white. And what happened? You rescued us, of course, yes? Stenstrom shook his head. No, I didn't. Well, then who? An apparition of the woman I love, Lillian of Gamboa. Taara was stumped. You mean the blonde-headed lady in your locket? The very one. What was she doing here? Stenstrom sighed. Well, apparently she's a monster too. She was waiting for me down there in the dark, dressed in pink. Pink is such a lovely color on her, I've always thought. And she killed every one of the demons holding you two. She stacked their bodies up and arranged them in fanciful poses, always the artist, Lily. And then she demanded I offer her my hand, and I gave it to her. I really couldn't help myself. Taara and A-Ram stood there listening. And so, I want to come about, head back to Kana as best we can, and pray the ship holds together. There's some deviltry here, and I don't think you two will get into trouble. They just want me. He closed his eyes and thought about all that awaited him. When he opened them, Taara was leaning over him. Well, heck, Belle, if you're worried about your lady, I'll date you. He chuckled, despite himself. Well, I'll keep that in mind, Taara. Come on, let's get this ship turned around. Now look, Belle, Taara said. If you think you're doing us some sort of favor by returning to Kana, you're wrong. I don't want to go back. And I don't need you to fret over me like I'm some stupid kid. I want to be here. I want to go to Baz. And when the three of us get there, we can say we did it all on our own. Just the three of us. Look what we accomplished. Sending me back to Kana so I can guard the statue again and be despised by my entire company because I'm a screw-up isn't doing me any particular favors. She turned to A-Ram. What about you? A-Ram held onto the pegs of the helm. Well, I certainly don't want to see any monsters, that's for certain. And I also don't want to get into a shootout with a fleet vessel. Belle, you don't strike me as an unreasonable fellow. I'm certain things won't come to that. Piloting a fleet ship of sea is what I've always dreamed of doing, and after this experience, after laying my hands on the wheel, I don't think I could go back to the Admiral's office again. Ever. He gave a sheepish laugh. This has been exhilarating, quite frankly, and everything I hoped it might be. I have faith in you, and in Taara, that we'll be all just fine. Taara beamed. This is a great ship, Belle, and don't let her current condition fool you. The Admiralty has taken away almost everything, but not her heart. And she, through us, is going to prove them back there at the fleet that she's not done. Even if she has to go to Baz crawling, on her knees. If she breaks along the way, she breaks. So what? We'll fix her. We've already done the hard part. The rest is easy. So enough talk of quitting, Belle. We've got a job to do, so let's get to it. We've got some crazy brandy to deliver. What do you say? Lily's apparition also shared with me a few visions of the future, and some of the items I saw appeared rather disturbing. Oh, no, Taara said. The future sucks. That's what we say on Baz. All those damn prophet types, don't listen to any of them. They'll just scare you to death if you let them. The future always looks a lot scarier than it actually is. And give yourself an ulcer. Trust me. Stenstrom peered into his office and saw the carpet of stars bisected by the glowing line of Druries' belt with Old Scrub, their destination, hanging in the distance. Taara's homemade sextant lay on his desk. Well, all right, he said with new vigor. If you two are game, let's do this. Taara, man your post. She cheered and plopped back down into the missive's chair. Ready, Belle. A-Ram, how's the helm? He asked. A little heavy, but otherwise wonderful. Well then, we've a few slow days ahead of us. Things will probably be quite dull until they're not, and then we'll deal with whatever accordingly. They settled into their positions and listened to the Macon clank. On to Baz. What more could possibly happen? And with that, we conclude Part 3, Chapter 4, Druries' Belt, and we conclude the first book in the Belmont Saga, Sands of the Solar Empire. So there we have it. Now, as I mentioned before, When I first wrote this book, it came out to about, a little over 200,000 words. That's a pretty big book. And my publisher at the time didn't have the cojones to really have a book that big. This book's going to be too expensive, blah, blah, blah. Nobody's going to want it. You got to give it the old chop sake right down the center. And this book didn't really have a ready-made spot to do that. At least not in my opinion. Not a good spot anyway. So basically Sands of the Solar Empire ends in a cliffhanger of sorts. And nothing is accomplished. And everything is still hanging. We got loose plot threads left and right. They're on their way to Baz to deliver this brandy. Captain Gwendolyn is after them in her scouting ship with her guns run out. What the hell is Lily? Who the hell is controlling Lily? Why are they so interested in Paymaster Stenstrom? What's up with all these stories about bad patches of space in the wildlands? What's up with Lily's prophecy? Well, not a prophecy. I hate those. Fuck that. No prophecies. Lily's prophetic vision through the Paramel that she sees Paymaster Stenstrom on his knees, ready to be killed. What's up with that? What's up with this lady we saw A-Ram with? There's a ton of dangling threads that need to be solved. And when this book first came out, that's where it ended, right there. And I spent a kind of a nervous year and a half waiting for the next book to come out, Against the Druries. And I personally love Against the Druries. We've got all the setup out of the way. We know all about the plot. They're on the Seeker, flying backwards to Baz to unload some brandy. Their ship is powerless, but they've got the Westminster as a drive engine, and it's actually doing a pretty good job, shoving them through space. So all that horse shit is done. Against the Druries now, we can really concentrate on the plot, and we can get some action. There really wasn't any action in Sands, so to speak. We can have some good old-fashioned science fiction fight scenes. How about that? That sounds good. I got the name for the book, Against the Druries, from an old D&D adventure called Against the Giants. And I remember when I'm playing through it, I just liked that name, Against the Giants. I thought it sounded cool. I'm like, I want to do an Against the something or other one of these days if I ever put pen to paper. Oh, I finally did. So this is a perfect place to call this book, the second book in the Belmont Saga, Against the Druries. And we'll find out the meaning. We know that there's Drury's belt out there, and they're kind of skirting along it. But there's a lot to that name, Druries. And we'll find out later in the pages of this book. This book's a lot more exciting. There's a lot more swashbuckling action. I really enjoy how the structure of this book. I think it's a nice, concise little book. And, well, it's not a little book, but it's right around 100,000 words, I'd say. A little bit more, probably 120,000. So is Sands, are roughly equal size. But this one, we're going to conclude all this stuff, all these loose threads that are dangling around, like hairs hanging out of the nose of some old guy, are going to get trimmed off. They're going to get taken care of. Trust me. Again, I forget nothing. So, Against the Druries, published, I believe it was published right around 2013, 2014. And again, it was about a year and a half after Sands came out. So, some people read Sands and are like, what the hell, man? I mean, you set up all this stuff, nothing gets resolved, it just ends. You suck. Well, I'm like, yeah, I can't argue with you. Yes, I do suck. See if I can redeem myself with Against the Druries. And once it came out, I actually felt a lot better. And as this was about a year and a half between the two books, I threw in just a peremptory chapter sort of to sum up the first book. sands of the Solar Empire. So here's the first chapter. This is part 1 of Against the Druries, the Sister's Fist, as it's known. Chapter 1, the Deep Sea. It's only 2 or 3 pages long, so we'll knock that out right now. And then next week we'll get hot and heavy into the major part of the text. Ooh, I always love that. So let's proceed. Part 1, Chapter 1 of Against the Druries, the Deep Sea. 3 souls huddled in the dark of the great airless ship, flying backwards through the deep sea to Baz. A fabled ship with a proud history, the Seeker had seen better days. She was designed decades prior to be fast and strong, to be agile, to inflict damage upon the enemy, and to comfortably house several hundred souls deep into the empty cradle of space, the deep sea as the fleet sailors called it. The MVF Seeker had done all that and more. A veteran of such classic battles as Surrender Quo, Marendra's 1 and 2, Two-Pitch Nebula, Hardy, Xandar. The Seeker had survived them all, had sunk many enemy ships, and was feared among them. But, as in all things, time passes. The new becomes old, and the state-of-the-art becomes obsolete. The glory days of the past become footnotes on the withered pages in a forgotten history book, and the Seeker, old and worn, in need of costly repairs and refits, ought to be barge-towed to the Kana boneyard, smelted, and remade into something fresh and useful. Many great ships had taken that sorry trip, but the right people favored the Seeker, the Sisterhood of Light, beloved of the Fleet Admiralty and of the League in general, was fond of the old warbird. "How is the Seeker?" they often asked during their visits, and those casual asides, frequently posed, helped save her. The Admiralty could not simply smelt the Sister's favorite ship. That would not do. So they decided to raise the Seeker's chair for debate one last time, and appoint a captain with vast sums of money to donate for her repairs, and to demonstrate to the sisters once and for all that the Seeker was simply too old and unsafe to continue flying. Why, they could melt her down, sell the refined metals to the sisters, and they could build a new convent from it if they wished. That would be a bold irony. So they put the Seeker's command chair on the blocks one last time, and they appointed a captain, an odd man from Tyrol wearing the hated HRN coat and of all things a mask. Lord Stenstrom the Younger of Belmont, South Tyrol, a self-styled eccentric and a paymaster to boot. He had been the only person to make a serious offer for the chair, and he had privilege, he had programmability, and best of all, he had money, lots of it. Giving the chair to a paymaster, a civilian clerk, was unheard of. And not only that, he was a clown as well in an HRN coat and a mask. Such an appointment would make the Admiralty a laughingstock. If such a man could take a fleet warbird's chair, why not anybody? Soon every pig-legged ditty from Calvert would be storming the Admiral's hall, demanding a chair. What would become of the fleet? So they kept the appointment quiet, out of the posts and the usual gossip mills, and intended Paymaster Stenstrom not sit on the Seeker's chair for long. Admiral Derleth of the Third Fleet devised a wonderfully devious plan to ensure just that. They went in and gutted the Seeker, had her huge SM coils ripped out, her thermoplant dismantled, her battle shot battery and canisters hauled away, and her bridge partially disassembled. They took everything, carpeting, tables, chairs, beds, and they even took food from the pantry, stationery from the drawers, and toilets from the heads, leaving bare, knurled metal and gaping holes where toilets once resided. As for the crew, they were allowed to conscript onto other vessels and were encouraged to do so. As per tradition, a newly appointed captain was obliged to perform a mission at the pleasure of the Admiralty. Normally, this mandatory mission was something simple and easily accomplished. However, if Lord Belmont was to fail in this mission, then his chair would be lost and his money forfeited. Lord Stenstrom's mission for Admiral Derleth: deliver brandy to a ball being thrown at the Fleet HQ Annex Tefligar Martin II on Baz in 12 days. Hence, by Kana's counting, it was more of an errand than a mission. Baz was barely a full day's hard sail away, unworthy of a once great warbird. But with the Seeker disemboweled and in a steadily decaying polar orbit, with no crew to man her, and with his order specifying that the Seeker herself had to be the one to deliver the brandy to Baz, Admiral Derleth and the rest of the Admiralty couldn't conceive of any way that Paymaster Stenstrom could possibly succeed. In one devious stroke, Admiral Derleth would take Lord Stenstrom's money, humiliate him in the process, and prove to the sisters that the Seeker was done as a main fleet warbird. Why, it couldn't even make an easy trip to Baz. The fact that she was scuttled and without propulsion was irrelevant. In sporting terms, the plan was to Cinco Pass. It couldn't fail. One small thing Admiral Derleth didn't plan on or anticipate. Great ships are said to have a soul and the will all their own. Like a champion racehorse that refuses to lose, though its competition might be stronger and faster, the Seeker had never before failed a task it had been assigned, not in decades, and after hundreds of engagements. Its current task, deliver brandy to Baz, a demeaning and worthless task, but, regardless, that's what was set before it, and if it had to make the trip to Baz on its knees, gasping and crawling every inch of the way with stolen parts and a misfit crew, then so be it. Great ships found a way, and events were set into motion. Lord Stenstrom needed help, and somehow, some way, he managed to secure the assistance of two unlikely people. One, a worthless Marine private known for her sloth and lack of discipline. The other was shocking. Lieutenant Josephus, Lord of the tiny House of A-Ram, Admiral Derleth's own personal adjutant, a modest, rather milquetoast young man, thought to be of limited skill outside of the office, and rather grounded in his aspirations. A man who feared his own shadow, quite frankly. The Admiral always felt he was doing Lieutenant Josephus a grand favor, keeping him safe and secure in his office at the Third Fleet. But look! Josephus turned out to be a rather accomplished pilot, and flew the three of them aboard the Seeker in a suborbital of all things, a very bold and dangerous thing to attempt. Tiny Josephus, Lord of A-Ram, had done that. Furthermore, Paymaster Stenstrom and his crew of two mismatched and unskilled personages somehow managed to correct the Seeker's decaying orbit, and by means of a stolen scouting ship, the Westminster blasted out of orbit using her engines and were on their way to Baz at slow speed with the brandy. Great ships have a soul, and find a way. Annoyed by this turn of events and careful to keep things under control, Admiral Derleth saw to it that the Seeker situation was kept under tight wraps. Paymaster Stenstrom, though a buffoon and eccentric, had powerful friends in the fleet captaincy and beyond, namely his venerable and well-liked father, Stenstrom the Older of the Warbird Caroline, and his mentor and sponsor, the famed Captain Davidge of the New Faith. Fleet captains loved to stick it to the Admiralty whenever possible, and this situation was tailor-made for such an intervention. They might just swoop in from all over, tend to the Paymaster's scuttled ship in flight, and give him a grand escort to Baz, all the while laughing in the Admiralty's face. Such a spectacle would be unacceptable and never live down. Paymaster Stenstrom also had an impressively high programmability with the Sisterhood of Light, and should they become involved and dissent in his favor, this exercise would end immediately. But until that time, the game was afoot. Admiral Derleth used his influence and kept things nice and quiet. He ordered standard communications in the shipping lanes between Kana and Onaris and Baz blocked out for maintenance purposes. He then summoned his niece, Lieutenant Gwendolyn, Lady Apprentice, to intercept the Seeker in space with her scouting ship, the Demophalon John, board her, clap Paymaster Stenstrom and Private Taara in irons, and return Lieutenant Josephus to the fleet. He gave her carte blanche and her assignment to do whatever she needed to get the job done. Period. Ever dutiful, Lieutenant Gwendolyn agreed, and even now was nearing the Seeker's position, her small guns run out ready to fire on the unarmed, unpowered warbird should they be needed. And if she had to kill Paymaster Stenstrom in the process, then so be it. So be it. And with that, we conclude Part 1, Chapter 1 of Against the Druries, the Deep Sea. Again, that was just an add-on chapter I put in just as a recap of the plot of the first book. Again, there was a 1.5 year gap between the end of Sands and the beginning of Against the Druries, so I needed to say a few words to fill the readers in on what happened. So we are on our way Against the Druries. Once again, it's one of my favorite books. I just like how it flows, how it unfolds. There's a lot of cool things happen, a lot of excitement, a lot of swashbuckling daring do. So next week, we will continue Part 1, Chapter 2, The Lantern. Oh, we know all about the Lantern from a week ago. So let's see what befalls our perilous heroes aboard the Seeker as they struggle to get their ship to Baz. Well, until then, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out.